Hey guys, it's Graham. Top of the morning to you. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Let's talk about the Dublin Murder Squad series of procedural novels by Irish author Tana French. It's just her name that is French. There are 6 books in this series. I recommend the first 3. All 6 have a very similar formula to them, in a sense, but they're all written from a different character's perspective. The first one, I believe the character's name was Rob. It's called In the Woods. My brother recommended this to me in 2017, and there are a lot of reasons why I shouldn't like this book, but I loved it and I gave it 5 stars. The main character in this one is an Irishman who becomes a member of An Garda Síochána, the police force in the Republic of Ireland. In real life, they don't have a murder squad, and the cops there don't carry firearms, but Tana French changed some of those details just to increase the tension and the excitement and the drama and such for the sake of the genre. In each of the books, if I remember correctly, at the very end, she'll talk about things that she had to change, like, oh, I put this location here, or I changed this neighborhood there, and the precinct is altered here because it worked better for the story. Like, she puts thought into that stuff, which is pretty cool. The first book, though, the main character is a member of this police force, and he's got something traumatic in his childhood that he has managed to suppress, but then he has to solve a murder case that brings those memories to the surface. He is a very flawed main character, and about halfway through the story, you start to realize that he's also a bit of an unreliable narrator. One thing that I will spoil, because if you get into this book and you read it and you have a slightly different experience than I will, you're going to be frustrated with me. You never find out the resolution of what happened to him as a child. He supposedly has this traumatic thing that happened in his past, and you don't really get closure on that. In any other setting, I think that would have frustrated me, but I was otherwise so satisfied with the writing, the prose, and this character in general, that even though he was deeply flawed and a screw up, and he ends up doing some things that the reader won't find admirable, and not even in like an anti-hero way. You're just like, oh dude, what? Like, he's a flawed guy, but you can understand him. He's a lot more relatable, and that makes you, I think, well, for my money, it made me reflect on, like, crap, what are some of my own flaws? Am I not as good at my job as this guy thinks he is at his? And it was a departure from the staples of the murder mystery genre, because it's like usually it's some competent, hard-boiled, down-on-his-luck detective who has to solve something, and this guy, he's up against something that he might not be equipped for, and it made for an intriguing change of pace in this genre. I won't say anything more beyond that. The second book in the series, called The Likeness, is probably my favorite out of these 3. The main character in this one is a woman named Cassie. She was Rob's partner in the first book, so after his story wraps up, now we get to focus on hers. It was already established in the first book that before she was on the murder squad, she was with the undercover squad. And usually you only get to go undercover a couple of times before you're known, especially in a country as small as Ireland. But with her case, she actually got injured in the line of duty, and you can get reassigned within the An Garda Síochána if that happens, at least so far as this trilogy is established. And you can pick your department. She decides to move from undercover over to murder squad. And in this second book, she's no longer partners with Rob. He gets reassigned to something else, and instead she finds a dead body that looks exactly like her. But there's an interesting and almost like manic, like, holy crap, we can pull off something really tricky here. There's an interesting scenario where they find out who she is and where she lived, and Cassie's boss is like, hey, I think we can send you back in undercover, rely on your old undercover tricks, into this house with her roommates, you can pretend to be her and just have some retrograde amnesia, and we've got a chance to find out if any of these other three people killed her. From there, it's just like the tension is good. There are probably moments that might not stand up to a second reading, but I was very compelled to keep reading. And there were some very human moments. There were some kind of like long conversations here and there, some explorations of an old dusty house, that things that otherwise slow down the pace in a tense book, but were still very rewarding to read. Tana French makes very good use of prose and slow examination. For murder mysteries, these tend to be slow burns. I want to say these books, the second one, for example, was probably 20 hours long on audio. I did read the first one in print, and I own the first three in print, but I did 2 and 3 on audio, and they were just fantastic. Obviously, with a premise like that, there's not a whole lot that I want to give away or spoil. It was a very touching and very moving book, but I will also say that it echoed some of the attributes of the first book in the series, where we've got a main character who's got something traumatic in their past, and they're going to go through a murder mystery to ostensibly resolve these issues. That same theme pops up in all 6 of these books. It's always some murder detective who has something traumatic hidden in their past, and they're going to resolve it with a case in the current day. The third book, which I believe the name was called Faithful Place, the main character was a guy named Frank Mackey, who this guy is a bit unhinged. And this book is, as a result, like the heaviest on the profanity, because he is the most Irishman ever. But he grew up during the recession in the 1980s, which in Ireland was extremely bad news. And he managed to escape and become a police officer, and he was supposed to leave with his high school sweetheart girlfriend. But the night that they were going to run away from home and get married, she just abandoned him. And he never understood why. And then 20 years later, he's divorced and shares custody of his teen daughter with his ex-wife. And a body is found in the local hangout near what was, I believe this was called Faithful Place, which was like the housing development that he grew up in. And it turns out it's most likely this teen girlfriend that he had back in the day. And rather than thinking that she ran out on him, now he's like, oh crap, she was murdered. He's got to figure that out. And you've got to untangle like generational beef between different poor Irish families in this suburb of Dublin, as he's trying to figure out, this ghost that's haunted him for the last 20 years. Again, excellent use of prose, characters, flashback. This book has probably the most humor out of it, just because Frank Mackey has a dry sense of humor. But again, be prepared for a lot of extra profanity and such. The first book, In the Woods, in addition to dealing with it being a murder, the victim is a very young girl, like a middle school aged girl. And there's also an instance of what was most likely SA going on. And so you'll be aware of that on the content side. So language and other typical murder mystery things. It also helps to know a little bit about Irish law at the time that this book was written. So obviously there's a lot of flashbacks to the 1980s when there was that recession going on, and all of these cops and detectives grew up in that era. And so they'll refer to it often because it shaped their adolescent years. But also these books were written and published in the late 2000s, early 2010s, and that was before Ireland legalized abortion. I'm only going to say that that's relevant because of certain things that happen in the first and second book. If you wanted to kill your unborn child, you had to hop on a boat to England, and often that's a euphemism for abortion. You get on the boat. So you might need to know that to understand the rest of it. So these books were a fascinating glimpse into more or less modern day Ireland, with a couple of changes. As like I said, Tana French had to punch a few things up to make these books work according to the staples of murder mystery genre stuff. But they really excel with her literary writing and the character examinations that she performs with her protagonists and the surrounding and supporting cast. So I highly recommend them. Just be aware of the content. I have read all 6 of them. Like I said, the back 3 were not nearly as interesting as the front 3. The cases were less interesting. The characters were less likable, and there were a couple of twists here and there. But because each book focuses on a different character, you can kind of just check out whenever you like. And I think maybe it was called Broken Harbor. No, I'm pretty sure it was Faithful Place. Broken Harbor would have been book 4. Anyway, Graham, you should have checked this before you recorded the video. Nobody watches to the end. Anyway, I recommend those if you're looking for a good Irish read. Drive safe. See you out there.